Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning into today's Author Talk series brought to you by the Library Speakers Consortium. The Library Speakers Consortium is a partnership of more than 400 library systems across the US, Canada, New Zealand, and Australia, with the goal of making Author Talks more accessible to communities of all sizes. I am Brandon Adler, your host and moderator, in conversation with each of the acclaimed authors that you will hear from throughout our series. Today, we are so honored to have New York Times bestselling author and anti-bias, anti-racist educator, Tiffany Jewell, with us to talk to you about her new book, Everything I Learned About Racism, I Learned in School. Before we jump in, I want to give you all that standard housekeeping information that keeps everything running smoothly, and then I'll turn things over to Tiffany. We have compiled some questions that were pre-submitted with registration, but you may also submit questions during the presentation by clicking that questions button that's just below the live stream video. If you've already gone into full screen mode, you might want to hit escape, and then you can see those tabs down there. There are quite a few of you tuning in today, and we will take as many questions as we can during our about 15-minute Q&A period. Now, to formally introduce our guest for today, Tiffany Jewell is a Black biracial writer, twin sister, first-generation American, cisgender mama, anti-biased, anti-racist educator, and consultant. Tiffany's been working with children and families for nearly 2 decades and has worked as a Montessori educator for 15 years. She is the co-founder, alongside Britt Hawthorne, of A-Bar at School, an organization that strives to support educators and caregivers in their anti-bias, anti-racist journeys. She's the author of the #1 New York Times and #1 indie bestseller, This Book is Anti-Racist, a book for young folks and everyone to wake up, take action, and do the work of becoming anti-racist, as well as The Anti-Racist Kid, a book about identity, justice, and activism, and the recently released Everything I Learned About Racism, I Learned in School. Welcome, Tiffany. Thank you so much for being here. I am going to turn things over to you now.
Thanks, Brandon. Thank you so much for having me. I have a bunch of slides to share, and definitely, if you have questions or things, please pop them into the questions box. And of course, the time is a social construct, and it's one of those things that there's never enough, but hopefully we'll have time to answer questions. So I'm just going to dive right in. I'm really excited. I love talking about this book, Everything I Learned About Racism, I Learned in School, and really wanting to share with you too that I wrote it thinking about all the folks who read my first book. This book is Anti-Racist. And those of you who've read it, needing a little more, being so let's dive deeper into how institutions misuse and abuse their power. Let's really look at what racism looks like in an institution. And I couldn't, me as an educator and just a community member who also has school-age children, school dominates so much of our lives for a good chunk of our lives. So really just looking at that institution that so many of us are a part of. So before I begin, I always like to do a little land acknowledgement type thing, and just sharing that I grew up on the unceded land that is the traditional home of the Onondaga, who are a part of the Haudenosaunee. And so much of my schooling story, kind of like all of my personal schooling stories that I will talk to you about, take place on Haudenosaunee land. Wherever you are in the States in particular, know that we are on stolen land that was cultivated by stolen and displaced people. We must work to center the lives of Indigenous folks and honor the traditions, languages, cultures, and histories we've been taught to forget. We must continue to learn and grow and always do better because we can. That's the beautiful thing about being human is we're dynamic and we can constantly grow and change. We must believe that liberation is possible. We must work together in solidarity to fight for abolition, decolonization, and combat all forms of oppression and systems of violence and hatred. And we must keep each other safe. We can believe in solidarity and the power of relationship building. Collectivity is possible because we're all connected. And that's I'm a library person through and through. I can tell you so many stories of our local libraries growing up. We walked to all the different ones in Syracuse and took the bus that we could. But the thing that I love most about like being a community member and going to libraries is that I could see other people in my community. And that was how like I felt really connected to other people. So you're my people. I love you. I'm super excited. And this is just me. This is my identity map. I like to sometimes we'll do like a long list of who we are and things about us. I really like to show people. I work with children, and this is my favorite way to show you. And if you've done anything with me before, I've probably shared an identity map, and you might recognize some things or notice some things have changed. Because again, like I want to reiterate, we're dynamic and we change, and the things we want to share about ourselves can change, or the things that we learn about ourselves change. And so that's my identity map. Some big things that I point out. I'm a twin. I have a twin sister. We live in opposite coasts, so that kind of isn't so fun. But whenever we do get together, we'll often find ourselves wearing kind of like the same outfit, and our children are all have the same laugh, which is funny. And my own children will be like, "You sound just like Auntie." I grew up in Syracuse, New York. That's on Haudenosaunee land, and really had grew up in the 80s and 90s, and had a pretty like. I was a very happy kid, but we also like struggled with things, and so if you've read my books, you'll read a little bit about it. And so this book that I'm sharing with you today is really, it's an unpacking and a processing and a trying to make sense of the world going through schools, right? So I was one of those kids who loved going to school. I loved the routine. I'm a morning person. I loved learning. Anytime like I have so many questions, and anytime I can get one of those questions answered and spark like 1,000 more questions, I'm there. I also I really love people and being with my friends and everything. And school was the place where it was like guaranteed that I could see my friends on a daily basis. And then there were other things too. Well, I'm just going to read a part of this book to you. So every now and then I'm going to read something. So I apologize for like if my head's down and things. So as soon as I started school, I was inundated with the ways that our country's education system colludes with and maintains the culture of white domination. It's unavoidable. Without being explicitly taught, I learned that I needed to get the best grades to be of worth and importance, and that those grades would somehow still matter years after I'd finished with school. They actually don't. That practice makes perfect, and perfect was what I should be, or at least strive to be. I learned that I shouldn't make mistakes, because if I did, I was the mistake and there was something wrong with me. I learned that people with the most power always knew what was best for me and for all of us, and should be the ones to make all the decisions, even when those decisions kept us purposely divided. I learned that success was getting the highest grades and the most sports trophies, medals, and rewards, rather than about how I treated other people and supported our community. That the most qualified and important books to read were the classics, written by long dead white male authors like William Faulkner, William Shakespeare, and William Wordsworth, and that my sentences and the way I spoke would always be grammatically correct, or should always be grammatically correct according to the rules of the English language. I learned that all stories worth telling should be written down in order to mean anything and to actually matter, that I should never be emotional or I'd be dismissed as too sensitive or angry or irrational, and that could lead to me being sent to the principal's office or detention. I learned that the people who held the most power were the ones who were the most qualified to hold and keep that power, that I was supposed to trust the people with power implicitly. Although it wasn't stated explicitly in the core curriculum or a textbook, I was taught that certain people, Indigenous people, Black people, Asian people, Latina people, people of the global majority, were the problem, because I learned to blame individual people and groups of people for racism and Islamophobia and anti-Semitism and transphobia and ableism and all injustice and oppression. But really, people aren't the problem. It's the institutions that are. And so this book is really just an exploration of really looking at the institution of schooling. And I kind of map it out by looking at magnet schooling, because I learned as I was doing heavy research for this book that I was a part of our city and actually like New York State's experiment for desegregating schools, for integrating schools. And this was in the 1980s. Like we always learned that in 1954, school, like segregation in schools like was totally illegal with Brown versus the Board of Education. But there were so many different things that states and cities and the country rolled out that just didn't work. And so in the 1980s, I entered school in 1984, 85. Like our neighborhood school is a magnet school, but magnet schools became very popular. And so I write about magnet schooling. I write about the system of tracking, which is technically now illegal, but it's really ability grouping. I write about military recruitment because that was a very like heavy part of my high school journey. Read about weapons searches and rights in school, and just kind of unpacking all those things that as I was a learner in school were like the normal things, right? Like these were just kind of how things go and you could question them, but like nobody really gave you answers on why are we having a weapons search today. But as I became older and as I became a teacher and as I started reading more and as I learned more and talked to more people, I realized that one, like people all over the country and around the world are experiencing very similar things. It wasn't unique to my school in Syracuse, New York. And that this isn't the way it should be. Like schooling could be a really beautiful thing that allows us to be connected to other people in our community, to learn and grow together, but that's not how it's set up right now. So this book really is like me looking through my own story, so it's part memoir, and then also looking, I asked a whole bunch of other people, other authors, educators, some teenagers, to share contributions, to share some of their stories about schooling, because I've had conversations with so many of them, where they're like, oh, I didn't love school, or I didn't love this, or this didn't work right for me, or and so we kind of put all of their stories into this book. So it's part memoir and part anthology, and then just like some history stuff too. One of the things I have to say, when I started writing this book, I never intended for it to be part anthology, and I'm so glad that I changed my mind, because writing is a very like lonely, solitary thing sometimes, especially when you're doing deep research, reading old newspaper articles that are very like personal, and to be able to collaborate with so many incredible folks of the global majority, and to have them say yes and to allow me to have their stories in this book is such an honor. And I hope you read it and see yourself somewhere in this book. My goal was for like every person to see themselves somewhere in this book, to understand that we have experienced and witnessed and been a part of like this system that has kept us divided for so long. So I'm going to read some of the contributions too. The first one that I am reading, they're kind of in like order from elementary school all the way to college, but I'm going to start with Min Lay. And Min Lay is an incredible author. He's an early childhood educator too. He's written a bunch of picture books and also like the Green Lantern graphic novel. And his latest one, Enlighten Me, is one of my own children's favorites. But this is Min's piece. It's called Selfless Portrait of it's kind of a one-act play. And as I read this, I want you to like think about your own schooling journey or the children in your life, and recognize that this is something that like, even though it takes place in 1987, like is still happening today. So before we begin, let's take a look at this picture. So we're looking at the picture of young Min. Here we have a young boy, it's Min Lay, standing in front of a self-portrait that was chosen for a district-wide art show. It's not exactly the greatest work of art ever, but we're not here as art critics. No, we're more interested in the boy himself. If we look closely, we'll see that his smile is strangely hesitant, and he has the slightest hint of mischief in his eyes, almost as if he's holding a secret. Well, guess what? He does have a secret. But to find out what it is, we'll have to travel back all the way back to third grade. So we get to do a little time traveling. So the setting, it's flashback. The year is 1987. We open up on a third grade art class in suburban Connecticut. Children sit in small groups around dark brown pentagon-shaped tables. The art teacher walks around the room with a box of small circular mirrors. She places a handful on each table. The teacher: today's assignment is self-portraits. I want everyone to take one of these mirrors and look at yourselves as you draw. Try to pay close attention to details and really put yourself on the page. The teacher leaves several mirrors on a table where young men and other students are sitting. The kids grab for the mirrors and realize that there aren't enough to go around. One kid raises a hand to get the teacher's attention, but young Min stops them. Mrs. Min's like, wait. Min and his friend, the only other Asian American boy in the room, look at each other. They smile knowingly. We don't need mirrors, we'll just draw each other. Having resolved the situation, the students start on their assignment. Most of the kids look into their personal mirrors as they draw, while the two Asian American students draw each other. And that's the end of the scene. So now we can picture what is happening. So what was the secret behind Young Min's smile? That's not him in the self-portrait. There's a lot for us to unpack here. At the time, the portrait swap just felt like a clever solution to a simple problem. But looking back, it says a lot about what happens when you don't see yourself represented or reflected at school. To understand that better, let's talk a little more about mirrors. Today, Min gets to write books for children, and something that's discussed a lot in the publishing world is the importance of books as mirrors for readers, especially children. Here we get to shout out to the legendary Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. By mirror books, we mean books where you can see parts of yourself and your life within those pages. Books as mirrors can be important and affirming because it is a chance to see yourself reflected back and validated by a story. For the young Min in this picture, while he didn't have a literal mirror in art class, he also didn't have many metaphorical mirrors in the books around him. And many of the mirror books that did exist were distorted reflections that showed Asians and Asian Americans as either sidekicks or stereotypes. In fact, at the time, the most prominent book featuring Asian characters was the book The Five Chinese Brothers, which has all kinds of problems, including racist illustrations and the premise that no one could tell these five Chinese characters apart, which reinforced the heinous and pervasive all Asians look alike stereotype. It's easy for children to internalize the messages in these books. So it's not surprising that my friend and I thought drawing a picture of each other would be close enough for a self-portrait. We were the only two Asian American boys in class, so people always lumped us together and often mistook my friend and me for each other. I felt that people were unable to see the differences between us, and eventually I started to see things that way too. Things have thankfully changed since the 1980s, but there's still a long way to go. There is a more diverse selection of books available now, and you all deserve to be surrounded by nuanced and reaffirming reflections of yourselves in your books, in your schools, and in your everyday life. I hope that you all have access to as many mirrors as you could possibly want. Mirrors that reflect the full range of yourself, the serious, the silly, and everything in between. And when it comes to your self-image, unlike me, Min, never settle for close enough, because you should never have to look at a self-portrait and see someone else smiling back at you. And now I'm going to share a piece from August. August is a student who's currently in high school. He loves playing basketball with his friends and his teammate. And his story, so the other thing when you write books, publishing takes a long time. So he shared this story with his mom, who the two of them worked it out together. And this is from his middle school years, and he's now in high school. So publishing takes a while. So this is August. In my school, there was a policy that we had only 3 minutes to get from one class to another. This is a very common policy. It's the same in my own kids' school, which is a very different place from where August lived, and in other schools around the country. There were a lot of people in the hallway, and my school was 2 stories. If you didn't get to class in time, the teachers were supposed to lock the door and send you to the office to call your parents. Me and some of my friends, who were all boys, got to class a little late, but we got there at the same time as other students who were white. When we tried to explain why we were late, we were sent to the office, but my teacher accepted the other students into class. I was angry because it felt like he offered them a chance. He offered them a second chance because he looked like them. And he didn't believe us because my friends and I did not look like him. I didn't get into trouble with my parents, but things like that made it hard to trust white teachers, even when they probably thought they were just following the rules. I got suspicious that they were always looking for me to mess up, and that when I told them the truth about something, they didn't believe me anyway. I sometimes wondered if telling the truth was even worth it, if I was always going to have to do extra to explain myself. I'm going to share a piece of Lorena Germán's story. Lorena has written the book Textured Teaching, which is a framework for culturally responsive teaching. She also has the second edition of her newest book coming out on July 4th. It's the Anti-Racist Teacher Workbook, and it's a very practical, concrete tool for teachers to use, which I'm very excited about. So pre-order that if you can. I'm not sure if you can actually. So Lorena grew up in Lawrence, Massachusetts, and she has a couple of pieces in the book, and I'm just reading a part of this one. And her piece is called What I Remember. I remember the first day of high school when the 9th grade class was brought into the auditorium and told that half of us wouldn't make it to graduation. The shock was deep, and the questions lingered. I looked to my left and right and wondered who wouldn't graduate and why. I also committed to making it because my immigrant parents hadn't come all the way here for me to fall to some statistical or mythical monster that makes you fail. The moment is one I've yet to forget. And I'm 36, and all the teachers just stood in the back like guardians of the space, like prison guards blocking our exit. They said nothing. Their silence was loud. And that's just that piece that I'm sharing. So thank you so much for allowing me to share these pieces too. And we'll dig into your questions. I see a bunch coming in. And then I have a piece to share about military recruitment. And so this is a picture of me my junior year. It's either junior or senior year, actually. I took Spanish every year from middle school through high school. And a bunch of us kind of continued on throughout. So that's me in my Spanish class. And one of the things, I went to my old high school recently, a couple of months ago, and the kids were like, those are the same desks. So they have the same desk, which were the same ones that my mom had when she went to the school in the 70s. So also just think right now, as cities are working on budgets for the next year and how underfunded our schools are, that the resources and the materials and the furniture our children have are the same things that we had when we were younger, and maybe even that their grandparents had. And how this is a system that kind of shows me it's pretty stale and we need to revitalize it. And it can be. And so after I share this piece and I have a poem, and have some questions for us to kind of just think about and look at, and I'll encourage you to screenshot so you can keep thinking about ways that we can make schooling actually work for everybody. So junior year of high school, so my sister and I are the first kids in our family to even consider going to a 4-year college, and the first to graduate from 4-year colleges and universities. And we didn't really know what looking for colleges was like. We didn't know how to fill out the FAFSA. Our school had one college counselor for I think we graduated with about, I can't even remember, but there were like, close to 2,000 kids in our school. And so one counselor who was like doing all of the work and couldn't get there. So junior year was just kind of this like whole year of exploration, right? And like figuring out, what am I doing? Am I going to stay close to home? Can I go to college? Am I going to work? Like, what do I do? And so I'm sharing this piece, and it's mainly about military recruitment. So I liked being a junior in high school. I know not everybody did. I was getting myself ready to grow again, to grow beyond my family and our home, to grow beyond my friends and our city. Junior year for me was the calm before the storm of college applications and big decisions. I knew I wanted to go to college. I had been planning on it for years. I was tracked for it. I was tracked in the like Team One, which was the college bound track of our middle school. From being admitted, I was tracked for it from being admitted into the gifted and talented program in 6th grade, to being a Team 1 kid in middle school, to being encouraged to take all the right classes to get a Regents diploma. I was college bound. My twin and I were the first in our family to set our sights on attending a 4-year college. It felt thrilling and powerful and totally daunting. Our school's one college counselor suggested every time we met, which wasn't often, that I look at his alma mater. I didn't. I thought I knew exactly what I wanted. While I didn't know which colleges I wanted to apply to, I thought I knew what I wanted in a school. I wanted to go to a small liberal arts college in New York State. I wanted to stay somewhat close to home and my family. I wanted a school with a strong science department and a theater program, and I wanted to be challenged and make new friends. I didn't know how I was going to afford college. I didn't know how to apply for financial aid. I didn't even know what FAFSA was an acronym for. It stands for Free Application for Federal Student Aid. I knew I needed scholarships to be able to afford a private 4-year college. I didn't know that student loans were way easier to procure than scholarships, and that they weren't actually free money. I didn't know that student loans would leave me in debt for decades. Our college counselor checked in to see how our applications were going and even helped us get fee waivers because applying to college cost money. He listened to us when we told him where we were hoping to go and was happy for us when acceptance letters came through. He was one person trying to support a whole lot of college bound teens, and there were a lot of kids in my grade who probably never even stepped into his office, who never even made it onto his list of college hopefuls, because we were all tracked to that very moment. Our schooling years readied us, or not, for this final push into whatever our distinctive, personalized destinies would be. And before I seriously considered which colleges to apply to, I began getting calls from recruiters. People called our house asking to talk with me or my twin about joining the military. The Marines called, the Army called, the Navy called, the Air Force called. The Coast Guard probably called too. It seemed every branch of the military thought I could be a good fit. They called during the week and in the evening, usually after dinner when I was sitting on the couch doing my homework and impatiently waiting for my favorite primetime television shows to start. Recruiters from the different branches of the military reached out to try and pique our interest and find out if we were ready and willing to belong. They even called us at school sometimes. They wanted us to know that they wanted us and hoped we wanted them back. They eagerly invited us to join the military family, a long-standing, uniformed, and well-funded tradition in our country. Somehow, my name made it onto a list of potential military personnel. My school gave me up because they had to. My school didn't just give me up, but a whole bunch of my friends to military recruiters. A lot of schools in the United States give up their students to recruiters, and they do it because they're required to. In 2001, as part of the No Child Left Behind Act, Congress ruled that all schools that received federal funding from the Elementary and Secondary Education Act had to provide military recruiters the same access to their students that colleges, universities, and employers had. This included directory information and in-person recruiting. The U.S. military spends billions of dollars on attraction, recruitment, and enlistment efforts each year. And in fact, in the 2005 RAND report, the U.S. Army spent on average about $15,000 to recruit just one soldier. That's a lot of money. Imagine if that money got put back into our schools. Most colleges, universities, and employers do not have comparable recruitment budgets at all. We even will find military recruiters in schools, sometimes as substitute teachers. And just, I also like write about how they recruit in neighborhoods that are predominantly Black and brown and working class and poor. So thinking about like what could schooling be? Like we think of our own schooling stories and think about the things that worked, but think about the things that didn't work, and think about the things that we've never even imagined too. It's really hard for us to kind of go beyond what we know. But I have some like ideas and some thoughts, and I'm going to encourage you to kind of do this dreaming with the people in your community too. And as I like share the question, like what could schooling be? One of the last pieces in the book is by Joanna Ho, who has written many, many books, including The Eyes That Kiss the Corner, Eyes That Kiss to the, or Eyes That Speak to the Stars, Eyes That Weave the Wonders of the World, and so many others. One of my personal favorites of hers is On the Tip of the Wave. On the Tip of a Wave. Sorry, my like talking is getting all. And her YA book, The Silence That Binds Us. This is like the reminder, like stay hydrated, especially if you're in the Northeast and you're dealing with the heat wave. So Joanna wrote a poem called School is the World. School was my safe space, a place that held me to my axis as the world around me spun and spun. I threw myself into classes and clubs, projects and papers, assignments and activities, filling my weeks with passion and purpose. I trusted school would teach me to swim in the water, show me my own power and worth, fill me with skills and wisdoms to take on the world. And it did. But every year, I look back and realize school held up a picture of someone else and told me it was a mirror, erased me even as it praised me, filled me full of holes I'll spend my life trying to heal. School is the world, and we must take it on. And I have this question for you, like thinking about what could schooling be? What comes next? What could school look like if our institutions were truly centered on learners of the global majority and those who have been historically, systematically, and systemically excluded and marginalized for so long? Like imagine what it could be, because schools should be places where we are honored for who we are and not viewed as those who have deficits and are disruptions. Schools should be places where we can connect with one another and dream and work together to abolish oppressive systems. Schools and schooling institutions and situations should be spaces and moments when we can be our bravest and boldest selves. Like, are we able to be our bravest and boldest selves in schools right now? So it is possible to commit to the daily work of abolishing those oppressive systems in our schools. And my questions, I have a bunch of questions coming up, but one of them for you is like, what are some things that you can do today or tomorrow, the next week, years from now? For many of us, like this is either the last day of school or school has ended. So what can our commitment be this summer? So when we start back into schools in the fall, that things can feel a little lighter for our students, for learners, for ourselves. Okay, and here's where I'm going to ask you to like screenshot so you can like keep thinking about these questions. And this is also being recorded, so you don't have to screenshot if you don't want to. But envision what freedom in schools could be. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? When I think of those questions for me, like, what does it look like? And what does it sound like? You know, I can hear laughter. I can hear people, like the doors can be open in the classrooms because we feel safe, that we can hear people collaborating and talking together, that we can smell, I don't know, maybe somebody's baking something in a classroom. probably smell like glue sticks and crayons too, right? Because people are creating and it feels good. It feels really good to be in those spaces. And they look like, I don't want to say home, but they look comfortable. They look less like institutions that are going to drain us of our energy and in places that are going to lift us up. They're beautiful colors, the like natural light coming in, not all the like fluorescent light. Like it just feels really good. And more questions is like, what would you like to learn? What would you like to learn about our schooling systems and how to make them better? How do you learn best? Like, and in our schools, everybody learns differently, right? And we have a system that's set up for everybody who's supposed to learn in one kind of way. What does it mean to actually be free in school? Are you worried? Like, kids will finally not be worried about getting in trouble. My oldest, at the start of school every year, when he hears the list of rules, is so worried that he's going to break the rules and get in trouble. And I'm like, that's too many rules to even like think about. Of course, kids are going to get in trouble. Like, how are you supposed to remember all those things? How can we allow for more freedom in our spaces and trust? How can we trust learners? What do we need from our schooling institutions so our schools can be free? We need money, right? Like, we need to keep advocating for our cities and our towns to put more money into our schools. And more questions too is like, we get to kind of create this vision for the future. And I love quoting the amazing Dr. Jamila Elias Scott, because she writes about her book, Black Appetite, White Food, that it's really important for us to know what it is that we're fighting for. Because if you don't, you're just going to get tired. You're going to get exhausted. You're going to burn out because you're constantly fighting against things. If you know what it is that you're fighting for, you can keep going. And like, trust me, she is right. So create that vision. Like, what do we believe? What do we need our educational institutions to be? How can we work collectively so schools can be places where we actively choose love over fear every single time? As a teacher, the more I trusted myself in that role, the more I trusted my students. And we started doing things like co-creating our classroom spaces together. So in the beginning of the school year, like, I didn't set it up the way I thought it should be. I'd be like, where should we put the books? Where should we put the math materials? Like, where do we do this? That makes sense to you. And sometimes I would be like, this doesn't go with what I think, but it's what they needed. And it made sense for them. So how can we connect and reconnect with ourselves too? Like, do that unpacking and that unlearning so we can move forward and we can really build this beautiful schooling situation, that where our children are like at the center. A lot of times when I hear arguments about school, like, I don't see teachers and I don't see children in those conversations. And what do we need from our institutions? And we can make those demands on them. They may not meet them, but we can let them know what they need. I've been working with the children in my community and asking them, like, what do you need in school to feel safe and secure? What does a just and free world look like? And they will say things like we need books where the authors look like us. We need food to, like, children are incredibly worried right now about how expensive food is and that people are unhoused everywhere. So like, just asking children, like, what do you need to feel safe and secure? What do we need in a free and just world? Can be a really impactful question too. And another question is like, what do we need in order to do this work? Like, we need to stay hydrated. We need each other. We need resources. We need time to process and collaborate, but we also need to move out of our like personal learning comfort and to push ourselves to do something that feels maybe a little uncomfortable. That's going to call on us to be brave and take risk so we can work to make our schooling situations better. And this is like the end of my slide presentation, and which is great because there's so many questions. And I also like it's starting to thunder outside. But thank you so much for sharing your time and space and letting me just like do my thing for you, and tuning in. And super excited. I do want to share one thing. I'm like reaching behind me. So this is the Italian edition of This Book is Anti-Racist. And I like bring this out because it is the first book published in Italian that directly addresses racism and anti-racism. And it is a tool that is being used in schools, just like it is here. But I'm so honored that it is the first book in Italian published around anti-racism, and that we get to kind of lead the way in this work around the world, which is exciting and daunting and humbling and just like so incredible, because globally we are in this together, and we're all working for a better world. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and move into questions, because there are a bunch of questions. Right, Brandon?
Yes, there are lots of questions, lots of things ripe for discussion. I'm going to start with a different Brandon's question.
Okay.
You mentioned military recruitment, and Brandon is saying, hello, Tiffany. Do you have any advice or best practices / approaches for military auxiliaries, especially cadets 12 to 18 years old, who wish to show their cultural and ethnic heritage while still maintaining the efficiency of a military environment? How do you find a middle ground?
Right. And it is like, and I'm not like very familiar. Well, I think that it's very hard to like show your personal selves in such a very structured military environment. But there are spaces, right? And schooling situations, and just kind of like, it's really important for us to spend time whenever I'm working with children and families and folks. We always start with identity and being able to share who we are, whether it's creating an identity map or working on an identity, like a bag where like you share the obvious things on the outside and things that make you who you are on the inside. But really creating time and space for kids to do the exploration of themselves and sharing with each other and doing that work with each other. Because like once you know, I always go back to the goals of anti-bias education, which were created for like early childhood educators, but really work beautifully for all of us. And the first goal is that we want children and learners to know who they are and to love themselves. And really, like when we all like know who we are going to do better in the world. And once you love yourself, then you also can like open yourself up to explore and honor the cultural differences of all the people around you. And then you can also, from that, you start to like recognize injustice and work together and collaborate to fight for justice. And so I don't know if there is like a middle ground, because for me, it's always like, we will always do the work of learning who we are first. And I think if you can do that work with those cadets, and really like giving them the time and space to not just like share, like a one day, like share this like cultural thing from your family, but to do the research of the folks who came before them. And even in your community. When I was researching this book, I learned so much about the community in Syracuse that I didn't know before me, like the ways that people fought for anti-racism in our city for decades. And I didn't really know that until I started digging really deep. So giving those cadets the space to like learn about the things that they are curious about, I think could be a really beautiful project and thing to work on. And then allowing that to kind of, you can also kind of like weave it in with learning more about the history of the like military, and learning about when Black folks, like learning more about like the different regiments and when Black folks like joined the military, and Latin and Native Americans and different folks, and learning about those folks, because we don't always, like, when we hear military history, we often just hear about like the top like white guys who did something great at some point according to history.
Yeah, those are all great ideas. I mean, confidence is such an important part of development as we grow up.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. And it's like the thing that we're going to like work on forever, right? Like we can't just be like, okay, I'm good, I'm done, because we keep growing, which is really great. And also, like, when you're a teacher or you have learners and you're like, you have all these things you need to hit in the curriculum, you're like, okay, but we just changed. Now we like, we have to come back. But always like keep working and building like that community too. Because like what those kids, no matter what kind of like learning situation in, if they are good and comfortable with themselves and each other, like you're going to grow so much more with them.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of curriculum, Kelly from LA County Library saying, unfortunately, the curriculum is quite Eurocentric. Moreover, the epistemological practices for many academic disciplines are steeped in white supremacy. Would you suggest revising the existing educational models and curriculums, or should educators and curriculum designers create a new system altogether?
So, first, it depends on how much time you have, right? Like, I am all for like big dreaming. I'm a huge dreamer, and I think being able to be in a space with other folks and do that dreaming of like, what do we need in our curriculum? Like, what do we want our students to learn? Asking children. And we're doing this in our own small city right now. I'm working with a few teachers and the curriculum director, and we're asking students, like, what do you want to learn? Because we don't know what they want to learn. Like, I don't even know like what they know, because things have changed so much and are constantly changing, and they have so many things that they're aware of that we're not. So doing that, but also like, unfortunately, we have to fit into these like models. If you're a public school, like you have to like take the state test, and you have to go with whatever curriculum, your city or your state are providing, because they are not providing money. And so a lot of times we're going to have to revise and change what is already existing.
Mm-hmm.
And that means like shifting and changing the books, reaching out. One of my favorite things to do is bringing people from the community in who are able to tell the stories that are not in the curriculum that I don't know, and to tell more of, to teach the learners like more about our local community or other aspects that we are learning about. But really kind of like, it's a lot to create totally new things.
Mm-hmm.
It's really exciting, and it's a lot, and it will take a lot of time and energy. And if you have it, like, go ahead and do it. But just kind of revising, if you can be really wonderful. And if you can, depending on your learners, you can even be like, okay, so our unit is like, we have to do this unit on gardening, which I know isn't like the curriculum for many like second grade teachers and like all over. But like, what do you want to know about garden? Or creating like a radical garden that becomes that feeds the community, right? Like where I live, we have a connection with a local farm that grows food to just give to people, right? Like people don't have to pay for it, and they have lots of grants and subsidies. But having kids engaged in that work engages them in their community too. Mm-hmm. So really, like, again, like curriculum, like it is super old and Eurocentric, and it doesn't really meet the needs of our learners today. But we also like, we're not going to meet their needs if we're not engaging them and asking them what they'd like to learn about, and if they have suggestions on how to improve it too. So if we go with what's already existing and bring the learners in to kind of encourage them and help them to make those changes with you, can be really impactful and really powerful in a way that just creating something totally new on your own won't be.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Kind of taking it outside of the curriculum,
Yeah.
Luis from Sonoma County Library saying, what are the institutional changes needed in a successful K-12 educational system, including politicized Board of Education funding, standardized testing, staff and teachers continuing education? Like all of those things are also part of the issue.
Yeah. I have to like read the question to like process it.
Do you want me to highlight it?
No, I can see it. I know. So like for me, like when I look at like the history and like in particular, like with the research of this book, reading and being like, the same thing happens like every 15 to 20 years. Like the city was having the same conversations over and over again. And I think one of the like really important things that we need to do that often doesn't get done is learning about that kind of like institutional history, learning about what has been done before, how people reacted, like what the changes were, because we kind of get in these cycles of like, we keep repeating the same things. And so it's like, you know, taking one step forward and two steps back. And if we can kind of really focus on, not like the total focus, but if we can start by learning that history and learning more about, you know, for you in Sonoma County, like learning about the ways people have fought over decades for those institutional changes, might give you some insight into like where to go next. But like also thinking of like school boards, I'm all for like people running if they can, or like you doing the work of backing or supporting. I know like where I live, some of our school board members, like during meetings, like we'll do like fact checking for them and like send them the information, like really working and collaborating with the folks that you trust. Funding is always a huge issue. There's never enough. And so I'm in New England, and what I'm seeing is the power of people standing up, children, teachers, caregivers, business owners, and really like pushing our city councils and our school boards to fund our schools. And it's been like this beautiful wave that I've seen, and cities starting to open up and having educational reserves in city funding, which just hasn't happened in many of our small New England cities in the long, like ever. And so just like really mobilizing and organizing people is really exciting. And continuing education, like I think too, professional development is always like nuts and bolts things, and things that like teachers are incredible and have so much. And if we can give them something, like not teach them how to write a lesson, but give them a lesson, like it's more likely to get off the ground. And I've been doing a lot of work where will model to teachers like lessons and then give them more lessons to do on their own. Like sometimes we just need to see and know that we can do it and have somebody that we can talk to. So how can a system-wide reset take place? Like, I don't know. I wish I knew, because I would have pushed that button like years ago. Probably when I was 9, I would have just been like, let's see what this is like. But it is like, I think the reset comes from like not trying to start fresh and new, but looking at all the things that we've been through already. Mm-hmm. And kind of getting ourselves out of that cycle that can be really handy for politicians and the people in power, right? They're like, if they don't know the institutional history, then we can just like, we've done this before, we'll just do it again. But if we can kind of tap into that and call them out on it and move them forward, like really like push that momentum. But if anybody has a reset button, like please let us know. Yeah. I would really love that because we desperately need it.
Email it over right away. Mm-hmm. So the educators and the teachers and such that are doing that groundwork, Betsy from Milton Public Library wants to know kind of about their well-being. How can Black, Indigenous, and racialized educators who are working to dismantle systemic racism in education preserve and sustain their well-being without being consumed and burned out doing the work.
Yeah, because it is like burnout work, right? And, what we saw in 2020 during the pandemic, and when like everybody was buying, like after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, we witnessed that, and everybody's buying all the books. And we saw all these initiatives that we're like, oh, good, maybe I can take a little break. Like somebody is going to like support me and like the work that I'm doing. And we've seen that like being taken back so quickly, and DEI initiatives just ending, and books getting taken off the shelves, and the 10 Commandments being like, now they have to be in schools in Louisiana, just like all these different things that are exhausting. And I really am going to like encourage all educators and folks of the global majority to know that like you don't have to do all the things. You can't do all the things, and you need to have those boundaries and say no. And one of the like best things I could do for myself and my children was when I started saying no. And I even had like a principal be like, you have to stop saying no all the time. And I was like, no, I don't. And know that like your worth, like you are so important in your community, and people know it. And like they're going to keep taking advantage of you. And to preserve and sustain your well-being, like take those days, take those moments for yourself. If you can, if you have like white people in your community who are knowledgeable and open and like doing the work of like anti-racism and abolition, like remind them like, hey, I need your help. I'm not going to do this. I need you to tap in. And if you are a white person, like be that person. Be like, what can I do for you today? Because it is like, there's all the work stuff, and then there's all the life stuff, and it's huge and it's magnified. And when we are working to dismantle these systems in an education system that's just like, this is like so stagnant with how things have always been done, like we're going to burn out. And if we don't take care of ourselves, go to bed early, read a funny book, watch, a show that makes you laugh or cringe or whatever. And especially in schools, like be the person that's with the children, like play at recess if you can, or sit down and read your favorite book to a group. But don't be the person that gets like, I know like a lot of times, in particular, like Black women educators will be the ones that get all the like discipline issues at school, and like, don't let them put you in that position. Like be the one that gets to have like all the joy with the kids.
Great
if
advice.
You can. Yeah.
So we are running out of time. So I do want to ask a couple of questions that we have about resources so that people can find further information. Either Sai or SI says, I am a Black mom who recently got elected to my majority white district school board. Do you have any helpful resources or examples of policy advocacy I can get behind to materially improve the school environment for the most disadvantaged and underrepresented students? And Katie is asking about any recommended texts for kind of a kindergarten age group.
I love like a good resource list. It's my favorite thing. So for Sai or whatever your name is, like, first of all, congratulations for being elected to the school board. Also, like, wherever you are, know that like I have your back here. There's a great resources like book list in this book that I love. But I will share like my favorite books and like resources around like policy change and just kind of like dreaming come from the work of Dr. Bettina Love. In her newest book, Punished for Dreaming, How School Reform Harms Black Children and How We Heal, by Dr. Bettina Love, is incredible, and also does that work of walking us through history so we can see those patterns. And the like Abolitionist Teaching Network, I think like ATN, has a lot of like beautiful resources on their website, which I think will be like very helpful to you. And kind of just like anything and everything Dr. Bettina Love does is amazing. And I think she is the most like preeminent, important voice in education today. And she doesn't get all the flowers that she deserves and needs all the time. And then resources for like kindergartners. I love kindergartners. I started my work as a preschool teacher years ago, and then children's house and elementary. And so for I love the book series by Juana Medina called it's like I Am, I Will, and I Feel. And I think for the beginning of the school year, like you can spend the first 3 months on those books and really like supporting kids and learning the language, like learning words to talk about who they are and how they feel, but also doing that work of exploring. And that has been a really fun project. And then this book, The Anti-Racist Kid, has lots of like resources, books in it for not just children, but for adults too, that will help guide us in supporting those young people in our lives.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Tiffany. Thank you so much for being here, for the time and the wisdom that you've imparted upon us today. I know that you've given us all so much insight over the last hour, so thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you. I'm sorry I couldn't answer all the questions, but like, time is so frustrating.
I know. I also want to extend a huge thank you to our viewers, of course, for joining the Author Talk today. Without your support, none of this would be possible. So thank you for choosing to spend your time with us. Below the live stream video in the resources area, if you scroll down, you can find a link to Tiffany's book. In July, we kick off our summer reading series that will feature children's and YA authors for the month. July 9th, we'll showcase the Tales of Despero author Kate DiCamillo as she chats about her Mercy Watson series. And July 16th, we'll feature New York Times bestselling author Max Brallier as he talks about his middle grade series, The Last Kids on Earth. All July talks are kid and family friendly, so be sure to register for these and lots of other great events on your library's event page. I am Brandon Adler. Thank you for joining us.